The most iconic horror games of all time are getting remade starting in 2023. That's Dead Space, Resident Evil 4, Alone in the Dark, System Shock, and Silent Hill 2. They're all being resurrected with a chance to terrify us all over again, and a chance to terrify a whole new audience for the first time. It's a new golden era for late 90s and early 2000s horror games, so let's see what we're in for. Coming out swinging or stomping is the undisputed king of sci-fi horror, Dead Space. Developed by Motive Studios, this recently released remake of Visceral Games' 2008 jaw-dropping original throws us back into the rig-suited and no longer muted protagonist, Isaac Clarke. Released only on PS5, Xbox Series, and PC, which was a smart way to focus development resources. Looking at you, Cyberpunk. Announced back in 2021 for a 2022 release that was later pushed to 2023. Motive Studios said the delay was to properly build upon the expectations of the fans. Good on you. Don't release a game until it's ready. The story follows Isaac Clarke, an engineer on a repair vessel assigned to assist the planetary mining ship, the Ishimura.
The USG Ishimura, biggest planet cracker in her class.
While investigating a distress call sent by the Ishimura's medical officer, the crew is attacked by mutilated corpses, and Isaac is left to deal with the necromorphs by any means necessary. The story treads a familiar path to the original, but has been revised to better fit within the broader universe that formed from the sequels and the comic books. Leveraging the Frostbite engine with heavy investment in visual fidelity and atmospheric audio that the original was praised for. The original development team smartly used lighting and sound to overcome technical limitations of the time, to create a thick and foreboding atmosphere. With those limitations all but eliminated in 2023, the goal was to double down on creating an immersive experience through the visual and audio design. This is one of the best looking games I've ever seen. Just take a look. The team also expanded the scale of the Ishimura. The ship is now fully interconnected, allowing you to freely explore without experiencing loading screens. Now, Isaac isn't alone. The ship is infested with necromorphs. These body horror abominations were an absolute revelation in the original. Not only are they terrifying to encounter, but they flip the survival horror combat on its head, literally, with this one scrawled note. Headshots have been the way to take out enemies, but now you had to use strategic dismemberment to slow down and ultimately dispatch your grotesque foes. This horrifying and satisfying system not only returns, but has been improved with new animations and new mechanics for Isaac. The combat system has been completely reimagined to make it more brutal and visceral, with Isaac Clarke able to literally peel skin from bone with the plasma cutter. It's also worth mentioning Dead Space's stunning diegetic design. With all of the menus and player information presented in-universe, Isaac's hit point meter is built into the spine of his suit, while inventory and map management is holographically projected and handled in real time. This method of UX design was incredibly impressive and immersive in 2008, and that remains the case here in 2023. While the Dead Space remake is a faithful reimagining, Motive deviated in key ways, ranging from secondary characters being given a little more screen time, to overhauls of key gameplay sections and new jump scares. It's interesting to see how the Dead Space remake can be both impressively faithful to the original and be willing to diverge from it entirely, utilizing the new technology to properly immerse us in the horrors aboard the USG Ishimura. We're starting strong with the Dead Space remake. Hopefully this high bar will be met with the rest of the remakes. Just 2 months later, the Resident Evil 4 remake is releasing. The original took a gamble, leaning so heavily into action, but it paid off big time. At first, it was exclusive to the GameCube, but has been ported to nearly every platform since its release. It absolutely revolutionized the third-person action-adventure genre with its over-the-shoulder camera, contact-sensitive controls, clever level design, and much, much more. In fact, it even inspired the original Dead Space. Not only is RE4 one of the most celebrated games in the whole series, it's one of the most celebrated games, period. It's on tons of best games of all time lists, often right at number 1. In fact, it's so loved that some fans argue it doesn't need a remake at all. So there's a hurdle Capcom has to overcome right off the bat. The remake will feel a lot like the original RE4, but will also bear a lot of resemblance to the recent Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes. The gameplay shown off so far has a distinct survival horror feel, but also appears true to the action and atmosphere of the original. The remake will stick tightly to Leon's story, while allowing for just enough of an expansion to flavor the game for new and returning players. The original was accused of being too disjointed from the main RE plot, almost disregarding everything that happened in Raccoon City, with a focus on the new biothreat Las Plagas, a parasite seemingly with no connection to Umbrella or the T-Virus. While this is just speculation at this point, there is evidence to show that Capcom wants to weave the parasite more consistently into the overarching RE fiction. With its darker and more grounded tone, we don't know whether some of the more fantastical elements of the original will return, like the Salazar statue part that divided fans. The platforms slated for release are interesting. It'll be released on PS4, PS5, Xbox Series consoles, and PC, so just a single last-gen console. And for you VR heads, there will also be content for PSVR 2. If you've ever had a chance to play RE4 VR already, you know how immersive it can be in VR. We don't know exactly whether it's the full game or just part of the experience, but that will surely be a terrifying way to experience this new vision. Capcom has a lot of experience and skill at remaking their older RE games. The original Resident Evil was remade all the way back in 2002. Their newer remakes have taken full advantage of new technology with the RE engine and have been very well received. However, the Resident Evil 3 remake disappointed a lot of fans when core content was cut out. So here's hoping they apply all of the lessons learned to give us the RE4 remake we all need.
Oh, you gotta be kidding me.
Humans interfacing with computers
for their own entertainment. Look upon my works and weep at its magnificence.
Releasing the same month is another flagship series, System Shock. Now, you may not have played the original or its sequel back in the mid-90s. Heck, you may not have even heard of these games. However, you've likely played their spiritual sequels, the incredible BioShock series, which just happens to be one of my favorites. Developed by Night Dive Studios and published by Prime Matter, it's a remake of the 1994 game originally developed by Looking Glass Studios. Set aboard a space station in a cyberpunk vision of the year 2072, you assume the role of a nameless security hacker attempting to stop the malevolent AI called Shodan. You explore the huge multi-level station, solving puzzles and fighting enemies. While the emergent gameplay was revolutionary for the time, it's pretty clunky and dated by today's standards. This and the upcoming Alone in the Dark would benefit the most from the remake treatment. The game is planned to have a simultaneous release in March 2023 on PC, PS4, PS5, Xbox One, and Xbox Series consoles. It was originally announced as a remaster all the way back in 2015 with the launch of a Kickstarter with a $900,000 goal, but they blew well past that, getting $1.3 million from nearly 22,000 backers. It was clear there's interest in reviving this franchise. The development since then has been rocky to say the least, changing from Unity to Unreal Engine 4 in 2017, announcing development was put on hold in 2018, broadening the scope from a remaster to a remake or reboot, then announcing the feature creep forced them to start development all over again with an expected release in 2020, which changed to 2021, then 2022, and most recently March 2023. I am 100% for releasing a game when it's ready. Don't rush something just to get it out. I'm still looking at you, Cyberpunk. However, these delays seem more about a lack of clear vision than about polish. My fingers are crossed that this extra time has given the team at Night Dive the ability to hone in on a singular and clear vision, with enough expertise to make it a reality. We don't have a long time to wait before we'll see if it was worth the wait, assuming there isn't another delay.
will suffer for your transgressions.
There is a house in New.
And that takes us to the granddaddy of all survival horror, Alone in the Dark. This series predates the original Resident Evil and set the stage for a lot of the standards even today. The Alone in the Dark remake or reboot is a survival horror game developed by Pieces Interactive and published by THQ Nordic. It's set to release on PC, PS5, and Xbox Series consoles. Believe it or not, this is actually the 7th mainline entry in the Alone in the Dark franchise, following the poorly received Alone in the Dark Illumination all the way back in 2015. Even with a number of attempts to modernize the franchise, it never quite found its footing. Remember that PS3 era reboot? And the Uwe Boll movie didn't help.
My mommy says that there's nothing to be afraid of in the dark.
Your mother's wrong, kid.
But Pieces Interactive and THQ Nordic are hoping this time will be different. Deep in the 1920s South, Emily Hartwood's uncle has gone missing. Together with private investigator Edward Carnby, she embarks on a journey to Deserto Manor to uncover the secrets of the mysterious place and the circumstances of her uncle's vanishing. There, you'll encounter strange residents, nightmarish realms, dangerous monsters, and ultimately unveil a plot of rising evil. Who can you trust? What will you believe? And what will you do next? The story was written by Mikhail Hedberg, who previously worked on Soma and Amnesia: The Dark Descent, with artist Guy Davis recruited to design the monsters. He has a lot of experience in conceptual and creature designs for comics, film, TV, and video games. With this pedigree, you know they want to make a bold statement, and what we've seen in the teasers shows. Unlike the original fixed camera, Alone in the Dark will feature an over-the-shoulder third-person perspective similar to the recent remakes in the Resident Evil franchise. And combat will include both firearms and melee weapons. While there isn't an announced release date just yet, we've been told the wait won't be long to jump back into original survival horror all over again.
Welcome to the madhouse, detective.
Last but not least is the remake I'm personally most excited for, Silent Hill 2. This is the first major installment in the Silent Hill series since Silent Hill Downpour all the way back in 2012. The story follows James Sunderland, who travels to the town of Silent Hill after receiving a letter from his deceased wife, who tells him she's waiting for him at their special place. I love the original so much, and I can't wait to jump back in to experience it all over again. However, I also know that Konami doesn't have a great track record of trying to update and modernize this franchise. Anyone remember the Silent Hill HD collection? Now, while it's still in the early days in terms of development and announcements, we do know a fair bit about the Silent Hill 2 remake. First, we know Konami is handing over the development reins to Bloober Team. They're most known for Layers of Fear, the Blair Witch game, and The Medium. This choice isn't necessarily a slam dunk, as their prior games have had a bit of a mixed reception, and they've never worked on a project of this size before. Check out my analysis of all Bloober Team's horror games to get yourself up to speed on their prior works. Next, we've seen the announcement trailer. While this doesn't show any gameplay, it does give us insights into the updated visuals and atmospheric fog effects, which, as you know, are very important. It clearly shows a high level of visual polish, but some weren't happy with James's updated look. It's been confirmed that 2 members of the original Team Silent are taking key roles in the remake's development, including Akira Yamaoka, the original composer of some of the most iconic music of all time, and Masahiro Ito, the original concept artist, will breathe new life into the nightmarish body horror creature designs. Now, one of the most telling bits of information comes from an interview that Bloober Team's chief marketing officer, Anna Yasinski, gave to Dread XP. While she avoids sharing too many details, she confirmed that Bloober Team is, quote, not straying away from the original version released by Konami back in 2001. She says, we faithfully stick to the traditional story canon while remaking gameplay and updating the graphics from the ground up. She goes on to say, longtime fans shouldn't worry about us missing the point while we're livening up the title. We just have some ideas on how to make the particular scare factors more appealing to the contemporary audience. Elsewhere in the interview, she said that the pressure is high to remake Silent Hill 2 because the team is dealing with one of the best psychological horror games ever made, and revealed that Bloober Team was thunderstruck when it learned Konami would allow the studio to remake the classic. So that's great to hear. They should have reverence for the original and understand how important it is to the fans. We've also heard that Konami is holding this project with a tight leash. From a gameplay perspective, we know it will be an over-the-shoulder third-person perspective, similar to the recent remakes in the RE franchise, which seems to be very popular, and a revised combat system. It's a tough balancing act to disempower the player in survival horror without frustrating them. Lastly, we know there's a timed console exclusivity for PlayStation, with a later release on Xbox consoles. We're likely quite far from the release, but if they can nail this remake, it could revitalize psychological survival horror all over again. Alright, now that we know what's coming our way and you've heard my thoughts, I'd love to hear yours. What are you most excited about? What are you most nervous about? And what horror game from the past needs that remake treatment? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Now, if you want some great horror games that you can play right now, check out my horror game Hidden Gems video. I want to thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.